Wael Da'du is Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief and one of the Arab world's most celebrated journalists. He has put himself at great risk to continue reporting on Israel's bombardment of Gaza, and he has paid a terrible personal cost. In October, his wife Amna, his grandchild Adam, his 15-year-old son Mahmoud, and 7-year-old daughter Sham were killed in an Israeli airstrike in Nuseirat refugee camp. Al-Du continued reporting. Now, this weekend, his eldest son and Al Jazeera colleague was also killed by Israel. Hamza al-Dadu was a journalist and cameraman for Al Jazeera who has been reporting on the Gaza war since it began. He had amassed over 1 million Instagram followers. But on Sunday, a car he was traveling in was struck by an Israeli airstrike. Hamza died at the scene, as did his colleague Mustafa Turaya. A third journalist was seriously injured. According to Al Jazeera, Hamza had been traveling to the Mirage area of northeast Gaza, which was designated a humanitarian zone by Israel. Hamza had been traveling there not to find safety, but to report on the aftermath of bombing in the area. The IDF told the BBC, quote, "An IDF aircraft identified and struck a terrorist who operated an aircraft that posed a threat to IDF troops. We are aware of the reports that during the strike, 2 other suspects who were in the same vehicle as the terrorists were also hit." So you did hear that right. The IDF, the Israeli government, in their press release about the death of a journalist is calling them a terror suspect, right? Could that be the kind of attitude that's led to so many journalists being killed, right? If you consider journalists to be terrorists, then you would kill them, wouldn't you? It does seem that the Israeli government considers journalists to be terrorists. So it's not a surprise that we are seeing these atrocities. Al Jazeera is, of course, a 24-hour news channel. So the immediate aftermath of the killing of Hamza al-Dadua was reported in real time. In this emotional clip, one of Hamza's colleagues in Gaza, Hind Kudari, was asked to pay tribute to her colleague and friend.
My last conversation with Hamza was about evacuating to Rafah because he knows I'm in the middle area in Deir al-Balah. And most of the Al Jazeera's team evacuated to Rafah. He was like, "You're missing, you have to evacuate with everyone and we're waiting for you." And I was joking with him, "Is there a place to sleep? Is there a tent?" And we were talking and we're giggling and we're joking, despite all of the atrocities we have been going through every single day. The last time I was in Rafah, I was searching for Hamza between the tents. I wanted to tell him hi and to chat with him a little bit. He saw me post a video of a girl baking cinnamon rolls, and I promised that I will get some for him when I go to Rafah. Hamza was a very beautiful man and journalist and friend, and I don't want to cry, but I'm reporting this right now because I know that if Hamza was here, he wanted me to report, and he wanted all of his colleagues to report and to continue reporting. And I'm so proud of Hamza and everything he did and everything he reported during the 90 days and more than 90 days, and how he was very strong despite everything he went through with his father. Hamza was a great friend for everyone, and our tears today is because we miss him, and we're going to miss him, and we're going to miss his smile. Hamza was not a normal friend. He was a very generous and kind friend, and I'm talking right now and I imagine him in front of my face smiling. It's a very big loss and it's a huge loss, and we're going to miss Hamza so much, and I don't want to cry.
It's okay, Hind. Just take a breath. Just take a breath for a moment.
Like separate my emotions.
Yeah, just take a breath for a moment. I'll just sum up exactly how obviously we feel the same way here at headquarters in Doha. It's a huge loss and one that we share with Wael's family. Obviously a tough time at a scenario and in a situation when you know somebody so very closely and that you work in a very difficult situation such as Gaza has been for the last 3 months.
So heartbreaking to watch. And I mean, it's so important to remember how essential these journalists in Gaza are. You know, no other international journalists have been allowed into the Gaza Strip. I mean, there was a couple of occasions where they could go in embedded with IDF troops. So basically could be shown whatever the Israeli army wanted them to be shown. We also showed you one clip of a CNN journalist getting into a hospital, probably with sort of an Emirati group, or a Qatari group. But no one else has been able to get in there. So all the information we're getting from within Gaza is coming from these incredibly brave journalists. and they are getting killed, right? And this is, Al Jazeera, the biggest sort of television network in the Arab world, and their top journalists are being killed, right? The top journalists are being killed. Now, is this targeting of journalists, or is it just because in this war what they are doing is bombing an incredibly densely populated area? Now, obviously, this seems targeted, doesn't it? It's on a car, 3 people driving in a car, 3 of them journalists, all dead because of a targeted strike. In another moving moment, Wael Dadu gave this statement at his son's funeral.
What can you say when you've lost a child? Hamza was not a part of me. Hamza was all of me. He was the soul of my soul. He was everything to me. It was said in the past that the freedom of opinion and the freedom of expression and the work that journalists do in obtaining information, photos, and footage in order for the deserving audience to view them, it was said that our job was guaranteed by international law and humanitarian law. However, 107 journalists have fallen. Their blood has been spilled on this land as if no one heard about what was said, as if no one was seeing what is happening here. I call upon the entire world to put an end to all this killing that is taking journalists one after the other.
According to Gaza's media office, 107 journalists have been killed since the start of the Gaza war. The Committee to Protect Journalists say they have recorded 79 journalists who've been killed. Now, whichever figure we choose, it's unprecedented in recent history. The Committee to Protect Journalists say this is the deadliest conflict for journalists since they began collecting data in 1992. Many thus suspect that the killing of so many journalists in Gaza cannot be an accident. Al Jazeera released this statement after Hamza's death. The Israeli occupation forces has systematically targeted our colleague Wael Dadu and his family, killing his wife, son, daughter, and grandson in November 2023. Wael and his colleague, the late Samer Abu Daka, cameraman, were also targeted in December 2023. The assassination of his son Hamza in January 2024 confirms without a doubt the Israeli forces' determination to continue these brutal attacks against journalists and their families, aiming to discourage them from performing their mission, violating the principles of freedom of the press, and undermining the right to life. Al Jazeera condemns in the strongest terms the ongoing crimes committed by Israeli occupation forces against journalists and media professionals in Gaza. This alarming trend requires immediate attention and action from the international community. We urge the International Criminal Court, the governments and human rights organizations, and United Nations to hold Israel accountable for its heinous crimes and demand an end to the targeting and killing of journalists. Al Jazeera pledges to take all legal measures to prosecute the perpetrators of these crimes and stands in solidarity and support with all journalists in Gaza. Al Jazeera reaffirms its commitment to achieving justice for more than 100 journalists killed and to continue to cover these grave violations. Every life matters equally. Every life matters equally. But while Dadu is, it's a bit like if, Laura Kuenssberg or Robert Peston, their entire families had just been taken out during a conflict, right? Some of the most famous journalists in the Arab world, sort of household names, and Israel is just one by one taking out their family members. Now, either that's targeted, which is a war crime, or this is just a typical Palestinian family in Gaza. A typical Palestinian family in Gaza. Oh, yeah, it's normal. Oh, your wife was killed and then your kids were killed. Oh, and then your other kid was killed and then your grandkid was killed. Oh, yeah, that's Gaza. That's Gaza. So one or the other. Either they're targeting journalists or they're killing people so indiscriminately that the experience of this incredibly prestigious journalist is just completely normal, unremarkable.
It's been a very long pattern that we've seen by the actions of the State of Israel throughout the continuing Israel-Palestine conflict. They have continually allowed journalists to be killed across multiple different phases of each part of this conflict. In fact, if you look at the stats just for this year, the number of journalists who've been killed in Gaza is double the number of all wars combined globally in 2023, which is a staggering amount of journalists that have been killed, hence the figures that you've said from before about it being the most dangerous war for journalists for 30 years or so. What is interesting as well is the incredible double standard that we see on the level to which the West reports on these things. When journalists are killed in Ukraine, it's a tragedy. When Saudi Arabia assassinate Jamal Khashoggi in a politically motivated assassination, there is global outrage. There is global Western outrage as well. Where is that same outrage when journalists were killed during Operation Protective Edge? It wasn't there. Where was the outrage when journalists were killed during the Great March of Return? It wasn't there. Where was the outrage when the Associated Press and Al Jazeera offices were bombed in 2021? It wasn't there. When Shireen Abu Akleh was assassinated, which we now know deliberately, by the IDF, there was plenty of condemnation from places in the pro-Palestinian world, yet silence almost from the Western media on the complicity of the IDF in their targeted assassination of her deliberately because they know that she would report on their crimes that they committed within the West Bank was where she did most of her reporting. This fealty to the actions of the IDF is so rampant that even when a Reuters journalist was killed in Lebanon by an Israeli airstrike, they didn't even name the perpetrator who initiated the assault that killed their own journalist in their own report. It is absolutely wild, the level of double standards that we see for the levels to which journalists get killed in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the reason for this, of course, is because Israel continually lose the PR war. The journalists that we see on the ground reporting on the levels of indiscriminate bombing and human catastrophe that we see across Gaza and indeed the West Bank, and not just through the current Israel-Hamas war, but throughout the entirety of the Israel-Palestine conflict, is always a big part of contention for the Israeli government because it exposes the things that they continually do throughout the Palestinian territories and have been doing for the last 50 years. But it's only becoming far much more of an issue for them now, in that the eye on Gaza is so great with the dissemination of information on social media from both professional and citizen journalists alike. And by what we can see is something that clearly at this point cannot be just waved away as some kind of accident. It seems to me, from the evidence that I've seen, that this must be some kind of deliberate plan or deliberately provoking to try and hide the truth that we see on the ground. Because as we know, as we've reported on Novara Media before, when Western journalists get invited through to the IDF, all of their footage gets scrutinized. They can only report on certain things the IDF allows them to report on, to try and control the narrative that gets shown to Western audiences, lest they see the real truth on the ground within the Palestinian territories.